Hey everyone, and welcome to Mac Tuts Plus. Today I'll be showing you how to install OS X Server and how easy it is to begin running a few services. Since OS X Server is advanced, this guide is more of an introduction, and whilst we won't touch upon every aspect of it, we'll try not to go into too much detail. However, if you're wanting to know more about OS X Server, then check out some of the resource links at the end of this tutorial. First, we need to download OS X Server. Before the App Store and Lion, OS X Server was a separate product that cost nearly $500. Now it's available for the fraction of that at less than $20. Once you've purchased OS X Server, it'll only take a few moments for it to download. Once you've downloaded Server, open your Applications folder and launch it to start the installation. Server gives you two options to install, either on this Mac or one that's available remotely. This is useful if you've got a Mac in a server rack that has no monitor, keyboard or mouse. You can upgrade or install a fresh version onto something like a Mac Mini server without needing to set up a keyboard or monitor. For this tutorial, although it looks like I'm installing it on my own Mac, this is actually within a Parallels virtual machine. I highly recommend you don't install this on your primary Mac, especially if you plan to use it as a server full time. Feel free to download a trial of Parallels if you don't already have it, and install Mountain Lion using my previous guide on Mac Tuts Plus, which you can then use to upgrade to OS X Server. Server provides three options for the way it can be accessed: local with VPN access, and domain name. If you're only planning to use it in a network with no remote access or are unsure, use the first default option. Next, give your server a name. I'm going with a rather unimaginative server. Before continuing, click the Edit button next to Network Address so we can assign a static IP to the server. The server would usually grab the current IP and settings and make it static, but I always prefer to make sure it's definitely set up. So change the drop down to Manual and then click Apply. Depending on how you're going to be using your server, you don't necessarily have to set a static IP, however it's highly recommended. It'll save you a lot of trouble in the long run. Next, you can enter your Apple ID to enable push notifications on the server for services such as mail and calendar, as well as alerts. I'm skipping this part, but you can always enable this in the server app later. Unbelievably, that's the installation now complete. It'll take some time for the changes to be saved, but then your Mac is now server enabled. Depending on the speed of your Mac, as well as how many features you've enabled and what services you're configuring, this can take a little bit of time to do, but make sure you do not quit the server application whilst it's doing this. Once the installation has finished, the server app will load with information about your Mac. From here you can view some of the settings available for remotely managing the server and reconfiguring network settings, something that has always been troublesome before in OS X Server. Now don't make any changes, but feel free to take a quick look around this server app. This is how you will manage and configure your server, and if you have multiple OS X servers, you can also use this app to connect to other ones remotely as well. As well as providing you with basic information such as how long this server has been running and the specifications of the Mac, you're also able to configure remote access as well, either remotely logging in using SSH through the terminal or enable screen sharing and remote management. This will allow you to remotely manage your Mac even if it doesn't have a display, which is especially useful for Mac Mini servers. You are also able to change some of the network settings of your server. Previously, this was frowned upon, as you would rather not change the network settings of a server whenever possible. However, sometimes it's unavoidable, and you are able to change these settings without causing further disruption. Server includes an option to update the network settings across the entire server, something which was lacking in previous versions. Server includes a next steps feature that tells you what needs to be configured now your server is up and running. Server is currently telling me I need to add some users and set up some services. We can hide these steps if we don't need them straight away by clicking the button on the bottom left of the window. That way, we can make more use of the space available. Alerts will display messages such as software update notifications, errors and other problems that require the server administrator's attention, all of which can be sent via an email if they arrive. Additionally, we can enter multiple email addresses. This is especially useful if there will be multiple people administering the server. You can configure the notifications to receive by selecting each of the settings. Additionally, if you enable push notifications, these can be pushed to a device as well. Logs will let you see all the log files that relate to the server, similar to the console app on your Mac. However, these tend to be specific for the server and services it provides. Stats is a great feature that shows you statistics and usage graphs of network traffic, as well as the server's CPU and memory usage. Users is where you can add and manage user accounts. Here we're going to create a user account for somebody called John Smith. Now many people can have the same name, so it's unlikely John Smith is going to be unique. However, the account name, just like your account name on your Mac, needs to be unique as well. So if you do have two people with the same name, they will need to be distinguished, either with an additional number at the end or with a different spelling. I'm not setting a home folder, as he won't be using the server to store his home folder and personal information. This is something that can be configured if you'd like network-enabled home folders, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I just want him to be able to access features such as file sharing. We can add users to groups as well, which makes managing entire departments very easy. If you had 100 employees and had to manage their sharing access for each one, it could be very time-consuming. But if all the sales staff need to see the sales folder, then using groups makes it a lot easier. Whilst we won't be using any of these groups today, it's useful to see exactly how they're created, which is just the same as creating user accounts. You assign a name and a full group name to the group that you're creating, and this way, when you add users to this group, you can manage them in one go. To assign a user to a group, simply open up the group settings and then under Members, click the plus button and start typing in the user's name. Alternatively, as you start typing, you can click Browse to open up a window that will show you all the users listed on the server. Make sure file sharing is turned on using the switch on the top right if it isn't already. Next, open file sharing and take a look at the current SharePoints. These are the folders that users can have some form of access to. You can double-click each SharePoint to see what the access rights are at the moment. You can also add and remove SharePoint by using the plus and minus buttons below. Switch to the Finder, navigate to the Macintosh hard drive and create a new folder called Our Server Data. To prevent any permission issues, keep this out of any user or home folder. The recommended location is in the root of the Macintosh hard drive. Now go back to the server app and then click the plus button to add a new SharePoint. Select the folder we've just created. You can now see it's added to the SharePoint list, but it is guest accessible. We don't want that. Double-click it and uncheck Allow Guest Users. Now we just need to amend it to allow John access to this SharePoint. Under the access list, click the plus button and you can type in the username or group into here. I'll enter John Smith and make sure he has read and write access so he can add files as well as open them. Make sure to click Done when finished. And that's our basic file sharing on OS X server set up. Now it looks like we've got some alerts since we made some changes. Let's check to see if any of the changes we made were applicable. It looks like OS X server's just notified us of some software updates, so we can ignore these for now. Now to let our user have a calendar account, similar to iCloud and Google Calendar, click the calendar service and turn it on using the large switch. That's it. If you ever need to check what services a user has access to or amend these, simply go to the user section and click the cog button and edit access to services. By default, users tend to have access to any of the services as long as you enable them and the person has read-write access if it's file sharing. Now to enable Time Machine, we click on the Time Machine service and then turn the switch on. Once you do that, it will ask you to create a folder or specify one to store backups in. Click New Folder and then enter a folder name. Now, before we continue, we just created a new folder on the server. This means it will have the default access rights, meaning John won't have access to it. If you remember how we added John as a user to our server's data folder, we need to do the same again. Open File Sharing, double-click the Time Machine Backups folder and make sure you add John as a user that can read-write access to this folder. You'll notice that as we're typing the name, OS X Server allows us to auto-complete it, or we can select Browse and choose any of the users from our user list. Time to switch to another Mac. On another Mac on the same network as our server, open a new Finder window and you should see our server listed under Shared. Click on the server, then the Connect As button. Log in with the account details, then you should see the available shared folders. There's our server data folder, so let's copy a file to there to make sure we can write to it. I'm just going to drag the default PDF that you receive in the Downloads folder. Great, that's file sharing working. Now to set up calendars and Time Machine. OS X Lion and Mountain Lion have a really useful way of setting up server access that is very easy to use. Open System Preferences and then select Mail, Contacts and Calendars. From the list of available services, scroll to the bottom and click on Add Other Account. Select Add an OS X server account and click Create. As you can see, the server is automatically populated, so click on it and click Continue, and then enter the username and password of the user account. Remember, the name is actually just the name of the person. We need the account name, which we specified before as John Smith. OS X has automatically determined what services are being provided and set them up for us, in this case, calendars and reminders. Now all we need to do is enable Time Machine. Open Time Machine in System Preferences, then click Select Disk. Choose Time Machine Backups on the server, and it will prompt you to enter your username and password for server access. Once it's logged in, Time Machine can now use the server as a backup destination. Finally, let's make sure calendars are all working. Open Calendar, and here we can see Calendar is already set up. Let's rename this calendar on the server Home from the generic Calendar and create another one called Work. And one final check, let's create a test event. Perfect. Our user now has file sharing access, a calendar that will work on other Macs and iOS devices, and can even back up to the server. That's it for our tutorial on OS X Server. I hope you found it useful, and if you're interested in learning more, check out the links at the end of the guide.